Imagine waking up one morning to find that your country's savings account is almost empty and you can barely afford to pay your bills for the next 2 weeks. This was the harsh reality India faced in 1991, a time when economic mismanagement and global events brought the nation to the brink of financial collapse. Today, I will take you through the dramatic event of the 1991 Indian economic crisis, the decision that transformed a struggling economy into a prosperous one, and the lesson we can learn from this crucial moment in history. Assalamualaikum everyone. I'm Ahmad Hakam Ahmad Helmi, and my friend Solihin will bring you to this journey together. The 1991 India economic crisis was a significant event in history of India, driven by various economic mismanagement issues during the 1980s. The government expenditure far exceeded its revenue, leading to increased borrowing from both domestic and foreign sources. This borrowing was intended to finance a growing fiscal deficit due to ambitious development policies aimed at addressing chronic issues like unemployment, poverty, and rapid population growth. Despite these efforts, the spending did not generate expected revenue, and the government income from taxes and public sector undertakings was not sufficient to cover the rising expenditure. The situation worsened as India trade deficit widened due to an increase in import, especially petroleum, without a corresponding increase in export. The Gulf War in 1990 further worsened the situation by causing a sudden spike in oil prices, severely affecting India balance of payment. By January 1991, foreign exchange reserve has dwindled to a point where they could barely cover 2 weeks of import, signaling an imminent crisis. This case study aims to achieve two primary objectives. Firstly, we will analyze the details of the balance of payment deficit that occurred during the crisis that led to significant economic reforms that transformed the Indian's economy. Secondly, we will discuss some of the balance of payment adjustment implemented to address the crisis. By examining this aspect, we hope to get a deeper understanding based on what we learned in the classes.
Next, let's discuss the balance of payment deficit that played a crucial role in the 1991 crisis. A balance of payment deficit occurs when a country imports more goods, services, and capital than it exports. This situation led to more money leaving the country than coming in, which can cause economic instability. There are two primary components of the BOP, the current account and the capital account. The current account deficit occurs when the value of imports exceeds the export, often due to a high domestic consumption and low export competitiveness. On the other hand, a capital account deficit happens when there is more investment flowing out of the country than coming in, which can be caused by political instability or lack of investor confidence. The consequences of a BOP deficit are several, including the depletion of foreign exchange reserve that can lead to increasing foreign borrowing, then causes currency devaluation and overall economic instability.
To provide context for the 1991 India economic crisis, let's look at the key economic indicator of the time, as reported in the Economic Survey of India 1991-1992. Foreign exchange reserves were very low at approximately $1.2 billion, barely enough to cover 2 weeks of import. The fiscal deficit stood at around 8.4% of GDP, indicating excessive government borrowing and spending. The current account deficit was approximately 3.1% of GDP, reflecting the imbalance between the country imports and export. Inflation had peaked at around 13%, eroding the purchasing power of the public. Annual GDP growth had slowed to about 1.1%, showing the economy was almost stagnating. The trade deficit averaged 3.2% of GDP, and external debt had ballooned to around $70 billion. To address the worsening situation, the Indian rupee was devalued from 17.9 rupee per USD to about 22.74 rupee per USD, aiming at making export more competitive and imports more expensive. In June 1991, a new government led by Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Manmohan Singh took office and recognized the severity of the economic situation. They initiated a series of broad economic reforms to stabilize the economy and liberalize the Indian market. One of the first steps was to devalue the Indian rupee to make exports more competitive. Additionally, trade policies were liberalized to ease import restriction, and industrial policy reform were implemented to deregulate many sectors. Fiscal reform was also introduced to reduce the fiscal deficit, which included cutting subsidies and reforming the tax system. The government opened up the economy to foreign direct investment (FDI) to attract much needed capital. In August 1991, India secured a $2.2 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund (IMF), which came with condition to implement further economic reforms. This measure led to the stabilization of the economy, and over the following year, Indian economy growth picked up, and foreign exchange reserve began to rebuild, and the country moved toward liberalization and globalization.
Now, let's examine the causes of the balance of payment deficit that contribute to 1991 economic crisis. First, high domestic consumption and low export competitiveness play a significant role. When domestic consumption is high, more goods and services are imported to meet demand, leading to an imbalance, meaning that during this period, India had a high demand for goods and services within the country, but this demand was not matched by strong export performance. When India's goods and services are not competitive in the global market, the export decline exacerbate the deficit. It means that Indian products struggle to compete globally due to lower quality and high price compared to international competitors. Second, unfavorable exchange rate exacerbate the problem. The Indian rupee was overvalued, making imports cheaper and export more expensive. This imbalance discouraged export while encouraging import. This worsening the current account deficit. And lastly, external shocks such as the sharp increase in oil price due to Gulf War significantly contribute to the BOP deficit. As a major importer of oil, India faced skyrocketing import bills, further straining the already fragile economic situation. These three factors combined to create a significant imbalance in India's balance of payment, ultimately leading to the severe economic crisis of 1991.
In the class, we learned that BOP can be adjusted using fiscal policy, monetary policy, and exchange policy. In the case of India, they also use trade policy to address the severe balance of payment deficit. Firstly, the exchange rate adjustment involved devaluing the rupee by about 19% in July 1991. This significant devaluation made India export cheaper and imports more expensive, thereby improving the trade balance. The immediate impact of this move was an increase in inflation due to higher import costs. However, in the long term, it boosted export competitiveness and helped rebuild foreign exchange reserve. Secondly, the government made important monetary policy adjustment. The Reserve Bank of India (RBI) raised the band rate from 10% to 12% in July 1991. Additionally, the cash reserve ratio (CRR) was increased from 15% to 15.5% in July 1991 and further to 15.75% in October 1991. The statutory liquidity ratio (SLR) was maintained at a high level of 38.5%. This measure will aim at tightening the money supply to control inflation and reduce import demand. The immediate impact of this policy was economic contraction and increase in unemployment as borrowing cost rises. However, these steps were crucial in stabilizing the economy and restoring investor confidence, which was essential for long-term economic stability. Thirdly, fiscal policy adjustments were also vital. The government reduced the fiscal deficit by cutting subsidies and improving tax administration. Through these measures, the fiscal deficit was brought down from 8.4% of GDP in 1991 to 5.9% by 1993. Reducing subsidies and increasing taxes helped control inflation and stabilize the economy. However, this fiscal austerity measures had immediate social impact, such as increased poverty and inequality, as government spending on social programs was reduced. Despite these challenges, this fiscal reform laid the foundation for sustainable economic growth and improved public finance and management. Lastly, trade policy reform played a significant role. The government reduced tariff, ease import restriction and reform the regulatory framework to promote a more open and competitive market environment. These changes were designed to boost export by making Indian product more competitive globally and attract foreign investment. The immediate impact included economic disruption and resistance to change from industries accustomed to protectionist policy. Nevertheless, in the long term, this trade liberalization measure facilitated sustained economic growth and integration into the global economy, significantly increasing foreign investment. So, in summary, the 1991 economic crisis prompted India to implement a series of bold adjustments across exchange rate, monetary, fiscal, and trade policy. While this measure had immediate negative impact, such as inflation, economic contraction, increase in employment, they were crucial in stabilizing the economy and laying the groundwork for future growth. The crisis underscored the importance of coordinated economic reform in addressing significant financial challenges and promoting long-term stability and prosperity.
Next, let's talk about the social and political challenge during the 1991 economic reforms. First, the impact on vulnerable populations. The reform initially led to more poverty and inequality. Reducing subsidies and cutting public spendings hurt the poor the most. Many people who rely on government support face higher price and less access to essential services. Second, political resistance and slow implementation. The needed economic changes were often unpopular and faced opposition from political groups and the public. This resistance slowed down the reforms. The government had to carefully balance the need for economic stability with maintaining public and political support. This requires strong leadership to push through these tough but necessary measures. Despite this challenge, the reforms were crucial for India's long-term economic health, showing how economic policies can affect society. In conclusion, the 1991 Indian economic crisis was primarily due to poor economic management during the 1980s. The government had a large deficit because of ambitious spending policies that did not generate the expected revenue. Additionally, external events like the Gulf War significantly impacted the economy by raising oil price, further worsening the trade deficit. As we know, the crisis led to several balance of payment issues where India was spending significantly more on import than it was earning from export. This situation was critically because the country's foreign exchange reserves were almost depleted, barely enough to pay for essential imports. Alright, to address this problem, the government had to implement significant policy change. One of the major steps was the devaluation of the Indian rupee, which made Indian goods cheaper for other countries. Thus, it was boosting exports. They also controlled the money supply to stabilize price and strengthen the currency. Additionally, fiscal reforms were introduced, including cutting government spending and increasing tax revenue to improve the budget. However, this reform initially caused some challenge. The economy slowed down and there was an increase in poverty due to the immediate social costs of the reforms. Despite these difficulties, the reform laid the groundwork for future stability. Over time, these reforms stabilized the economy, leading to steady economic growth. India became more integrated with the global economy, and the crisis built a stronger economic foundation for future growth. The 1991 crisis underscored the importance of aligning monetary policies with real economic conditions. It also highlighted the need for well-coordinated policy action to stabilize the economy and promote long-term growth. This crisis served as an important example of effective economic crisis management, showing that comprehensive and well-planned reform can address several economic issues and promote robust development.